Hello, Packers fans, wherever you may be. It's time for a new edition of the Pack Attack Cast. We took a break to process the 2025 season and recharge our batteries, and we're ready for 2026. And we're going to start our coverage of hopefully a Super Bowl season for your Green Bay Packers today. Before we get into that, I want to thank everybody from the bottom of my heart for a great year in 2025. We got to 15,424 subs in less than a year, which is 3 times my initial goal for this podcast. So we really appreciate the support. I want to thank everybody who hit that sub button. If you're new, hit that sub button because we've got great plans and great goals for 2026. So it's far too early to discuss players, but we got a lot of coaching movement today for your Packers, and that's what we're going to talk about. I think the Packers really struggled at times with their staff, their coaching staff. I'm not talking about Matt LaFleur, and I'm not talking about Brian Gutekunst, but some of the coaching staff was a little lackluster. So one of the benefits, and we'll talk about this in depth, of Jeff Hafley leaving and taking some of our coaches with him is that we can recharge the coaching battery for your Green Bay Packers. And I think that's something that's going to play a huge role in improvement over last year. I think there were many times where the coaches stumbled last year, and I still expect that there's going to be some additional coaching changes. Possibly offensive line coach is something that I would like to see change. We'll see what happens there. But especially on defense, if you look at the meltdowns that were those last 5 games for the Green Bay Packers, again and again, it was the offense that was holding the line and keeping the Packers in the game, and it was the defense that continued to find ways to lose the game. Now, a lot of that was injuries, so I'm not putting all of that on Jeff Hafley and his coaching staff. When you lose arguably a top 2 or 3 pass rusher, that's going to be a problem. When you lose your best defensive tackle, that's going to be a problem. When you have players rotating in and out of the injured list on defense, especially at the defensive line, that's going to be a problem. That's going to make the secondary look worse than it is. But refreshing this coaching staff, and I think the Green Bay Packers have done an amazing job, especially on defense so far, to improve their coaching staff. I think it's going to pay huge dividends starting in training camp. Okay? Training camp is where the building blocks for a Super Bowl start. If you go to the Packers training camp, they have banners all the way around that really hit me because it says it all starts here. And that really is where coaches really make their hay. Position coaches. Now, your defensive coordinator, your passing coordinator defense, they constantly are evolving and improving your defense. But your position coaches are really making their hay in training camp, mini camp, the preseason, getting your players ready for the regular season. So we've got some exciting coaches changes to talk about. So let's talk about what is happening at the top. Okay, Brian Gutekunst is back for an extension. We don't know exactly how long that extension is. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But Brian, he's the architect of the roster. He keeps the front office running. He keeps the scouts doing what they're supposed to be doing, and the roster where it needs to be. He's gotten draft picks, in-season transactions, and trades right more often than not. I give Brian Gutekunst a solid B+ as a GM right now. There are some things he could do better. We've had some misses in the draft. Um, we've had some players put in the wrong position on the offensive line, in particular this past year. And while that is decisions of the coaching staff, Brian Gutekunst obviously has a big voice in the room to say, hey, Anthony Belton is really a guard more than he is a tackle. Let's put him at guard. That was a move the Packers made way too late. Um, so Jordan Morgan, he's a tackle. Why are we putting him in at guard? These are key examples of where a GM should step in and have his voice heard with the coaching staff. And that's something that I think can really improve for Brian. That being said, I think he's done an amazing job of consistently putting a winning team on the field. So I think Brian does not get enough credit for that. He gets too much of the blame and not enough credit for the success on the field. So I'm very happy that Brian is back. I've also been a strong proponent of Matt LaFleur being back because Matt LaFleur is your head of player development. He's the driver of the offensive success. He's your play caller on offense in game day. And that's very important because when you have a coach that calls plays either on offense or defense, it gives you continuity and it protects you from major play. For example, we don't have to worry about our play caller on offense going to be the head coach of another team because he's the head coach of our team. And some teams benefit from that on defense. We benefit on offense. Now, that does mean sometimes offensive talent on the coaching staff is going to leave for better opportunities, but we have that continuity of Matt LaFleur, and I think Matt LaFleur is still one of the top 5 play callers on offense. Does he need to improve in late game coaching? Does he need to improve in timeout usage? Does he need to improve on challenges? Matt LaFleur has one of the lowest win rates for challenges in the NFL. It's quite comical. Anytime I see Matt LaFleur throw out that red flag, it's probably going to be wrong 75% of the time. Now, I think sometimes Matt LaFleur is very aggressive on challenges because he feels like he's got nothing to lose other than a timeout, and sometimes it pays off for him. So, maybe him being more judicious on the use of challenges is something Matt LaFleur needs to work on. More importantly for me personally, he keeps my wife interested in the Green Bay Packers because he's so dreamy with his perfect hair and his great beard. It gets my wife to actually watch the games just so she could see Matt LaFleur, which makes game day a little bit more fun when I'm not having, hey, take out the garbage or, hey, do some chores in game day. So happy for Matt LaFleur doing that for me. But all kidding aside, he does need to show more accountability and show more fire. One of the things that drives me nuts about Matt LaFleur, and I understand what he's trying to do, but when he gives an interview after a loss, he kind of distances himself from the loss. He's like, yeah, it's really too bad that happened. I feel really bad for the players that we lost that game. Instead of saying, you know what? I screwed up. I made a mistake. I need to get better. It's something that Matt LaFleur tends to do in losses. Now, for wins, he does a great job of giving his players credit, and he doesn't try to take credit away from his players. But I'd like to see Matt LaFleur say, you know what? I effed up. That was a mistake I made, and we're going to move forward. Or, I could have done this better, or as a team coaching staff, we could have done this better. That's something I'd like to see Matt LaFleur really try to work on, is do some self-scouting. It's okay to say, hey, we made a mistake, or I made a mistake, Matt, instead of saying, I feel bad for the players. Like, no. How about I feel bad for myself? I'm pissed off that we screwed up. I think that would really go a long way, Matt, not just for self-scouting, but also there's a lot of Packers fans that are frustrated with Matt LaFleur. And I think if he came out and he said, you know what, I fucked that up, I'm going to do better. Okay? I think that would really help Matt LaFleur both in self-scouting and his relationship with some of those fans out there that are frustrated with him. Now, we don't know the length of the extensions that Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur signed. We probably won't know until it's a year or two away from the end of those contracts. But I'm assuming they got at least a 3-year extension, and that Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur are going to be a part of this team until at least 2030. So those people that hate Brian Gutekunst or Matt LaFleur, you're probably going to be frustrated for a couple years. But in my opinion, it's a great thing to have those two guys back to at least 2030. That's my assumption. We're probably never going to know the length of the extension or the price of the extension, and we really don't need to know that. That's really an ed policy thing. But the fact that the GM and the coach have job security is going to allow them to really work hard to improve this roster. And I'm telling you, from this point on until they leave, hopefully with a couple Super Bowls, it's only going to get tougher for Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur. And the reason for that is the trade that we made to get Micah Parsons. Now, I support that trade 100%. But the reality is the bill is going to start coming due this year. We have issues on salary cap, and we have issues on draft picks that Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur are going to have to work together on to mitigate. Brian Gutekunst is going to have to make the most of every draft pick he has, every free agent signing, every waiver wire pickup is going to be critical for Brian Gutekunst. On the other side of it, Matt LaFleur is going to have to really work on his player development side of his role. He really needs to lean into it. We know Matt LaFleur is a great play caller. He's a very good motivator, but he needs to be a teacher, number one, especially in training camp this year. We need to take the extra time, the extra effort to work on player development. Another thing, and we're going to talk about this later, is the Packers need to look internally on what they can do to reduce their injury rate. They were the 5th highest in salary cap lost to, actually 3rd highest when it comes to salary cap dollars lost on injured reserve in 2025. There is a direct corollary between healthy teams and Super Bowl teams, and the Packers in 2025 were working against themselves to get to the Super Bowl with their injuries. It started in training camp, and the Packers really did not get to the point where they were at full strength throughout the course of 2025. There was always a key player or two that was not available. If the Packers can work on that internally, then I think that's really going to help our chances of getting to the Super Bowl. Now, torn ACLs, torn Achilles, those are things that you cannot stop when they happen on the field, no matter how good your medical staff is. But working on conditioning, finding ways to get um, to manage small injuries before they become big injuries is very important. And I think the Packers need to find ways to get better at mitigating injury in 2026. Again, you can't stop a torn ACL, but you can do conditioning drills and you can do um, medical evaluations to try to avoid those issues before they become big issues. So we're going to watch that very closely in the off season. Now let's get into who is leaving. First of all, of course, Jeff Hafley is leaving. He is now head coach of the Dolphins. He's the brain behind the defensive scheme. So the scheme that we saw with Jeff Hafley is going to go away. Now, our new coaching staff, and I'll talk about that in a minute, is going to find ways to take as much as they can from Jeff Hafley and carry it forward to reduce the learning that the players need to do. But there are going to be significant changes in our defensive scheme. That's just going to have to happen. He was also a very good player developer. If you look at the defense, most of the younger players significantly have improved while Jeff Hafley was here. He deserves a lot of credit for that. So our defensive coordinator, our new defensive coordinator, is going to have to lean into that player development just like Matt LaFleur is going to have to do. Jeff Hafley was also a great leader, a great speaker at the podium. And I was very surprised. In fact, one of my last videos that I did in 2025, I believed that Jeff Hafley was going to stay because there weren't a lot of openings for a defensive head coach. And the Dolphins are really not a great fit for Jeff Hafley. So I was very surprised he took this role. They don't have a lot of great players on defense. They have significant quarterback issues, so you would expect the Dolphins to hire a coach that can work with the quarterback. It's a very difficult division between the Patriots and the Bills to break up into the playoff ranks. And quite frankly, I think the Dolphins have a very poor owner who makes a lot of knee-jerk decisions and doesn't put a lot of confidence and support in his coaching staff. While I love Hafley and I hope he succeeds, I'm afraid he's set up for failure in 3 years. I would have loved to see him wait another cycle for a better fit. I think the Dolphins offered Jeff Hafley the job, but they said, we need an answer right away. And Jeff Hafley wasn't able to look at other coaching options. Otherwise, I think he could have found a better fit. I would argue even the Browns' job, despite their dysfunction, would be a better fit for Jeff Hafley than the Dolphins. So hopefully Jeff Hafley succeeds, but I'm really concerned for him that this is going to be a disappointment for him. So Jeff Hafley has moved on to the Dolphins, and he's taking a lot of coaches with him. So we're going to talk about some of the coaches that are departing right now. Derek Ansley, passing game coordinator defense. His role was assisting the defensive coordinator with the secondary game plan in the season and adjustments each week and assist in player development. Many of the late game Packer failures, look at the games against the Bears, for example, were due to explosive plays against the secondary. So having Ansley leave, while he might not be directly responsible for some of those meltdowns because he wasn't playing the calls, Ansley was a part of the brain trust that made those defenses happen. As of this video, I don't know if he's going to Miami, but he is moving on to another team. So we're going to have to see what happens with Derek Ansley. My assumption is, and we're going to talk about the hires, that they decided that they had a better fit than Ansley, and they decided to move on. They're probably paying his contract for this year. But he'll probably end up, my guess would be, in Miami, maybe as a consultant or some sort of a lower level coach for Miami. We'll have to see what happens. Next up, who departed is Sean Duggan, quarterback's coach. He's off to be on the Dolphins, role to be determined. He assists the defensive coordinator with linebacker game plan and weekly adjustments, player development. He came in with Hafley, so it makes really a lot of sense for him to leave with Hafley. And to be honest, we've seen the linebackers take a step back in 2025. I thought the linebacker play was a little lackluster in 2025. So having a change at the linebacker coach is not necessarily a bad thing for the Packers this year. But let's talk about some of the reinforcements that are on the way. But there's a couple there's a couple more coaches that have left. So let's talk about that first. So this was late breaking news. Just added this. So Coach Sean Mannion was our quarterback coach. He's moving on to be the Eagles' offensive coordinator. I think this is mitigated by the fact that Jordan Love is a veteran quarterback and a leader. And Matt LaFleur is a former quarterback coach and can mitigate this loss. Matt LaFleur knows what Jordan Love does well, what he doesn't do well, and he knows how to call plays for Jordan Love. We're probably going to see a couple replacements either come up internally from the building or externally for the quarterback coach. But as your quarterback becomes more and more of a veteran, it becomes less important for the day-to-day. So when you have a young quarterback, it's a lot about development, right? It's a lot about development, teaching them the skills, showing them how to improve. When you have a veteran quarterback like Jordan Love, the job becomes more about self-scouting and helping the quarterback work on the small things that are problems in his game versus the big development questions. So I would argue it's not a bad time to have a transition and try to find a quarterback coach that is really good at refining the small details for Jordan Love. So we'll see what happens there. Also leaving is Nathaniel Hackett. He's the defensive consultant. He's now going to be the quarterback coach for Miami. We know Hackett has been a former defensive coordinator. He's also been a former head coach, and he failed miserably. So having him leave and go on to the Dolphins is not necessarily a bad thing, and we'll see what the Packers do to replace that role. Being a defensive consultant, it's less important than you would think about replacing him. I'm sure they will have someone internally replace him, and I think that will be fine. Now, let's take a look at the new additions, because I'm very excited about these, okay? Jonathan Gannon is now the new defensive coordinator, former head coach for the Cardinals. Matt LaFleur said that experience is invaluable to him. I would agree. And if we see a change on special teams, which we haven't heard anything about yet, it wouldn't surprise me if Jonathan Gannon was also given the assistant head coach title as well, which is currently handed to the special teams coach. But I personally would like to see a change there. But right now, Jonathan Gannon is our new defensive coordinator. He was a former defensive coordinator for the Eagles, won a Super Bowl with the Eagles as a defensive coordinator, so we know he has the ability to step up in big moments and coach big games. His strength is in the secondary, just like Jeff Hafley. His defenses have a reputation for being vulnerable to the run, just like Jeff Hafley. Um, he plays quarters at a very high rate. Now, I'm going to do a different video where we talk about quarters coverage, but Jonathan Gannon is one of the advocates for quarter coverage, and we'll talk about that in depth. It's a significant departure from Jeff Hafley in the secondary. The offensive line is not going to see significant changes there, except for possibly defensive linemen running in coverage, which will be a bit of a different change. But we'll see how that develops in training camp. He also has a focus on safeties in coverage and run stopping. If you look at both the Eagles and especially when he was the head coach of the Cardinals, they used their safeties in very unique ways. And I would argue that as a group, the Packers have one of the top safety rooms in the league. And I think he has a lot to work with the safeties we have in staff to really load that in. So you might see linebackers on the field less than we saw with Jeff Hafley, and you're going to see extra safeties in the game, much like the Cardinals did, but they didn't have the stars on defense to really make it work. I think that the Packers do have those stars, especially with Micah Parsons able to put pressure on the quarterback by himself to really make safeties in run defense and coverage work. And the Packers really have the great safeties to really make that work. So I'm very excited to see what Jonathan Gannon's going to see and do in training camp, especially with the secondary. Next up, and this was a huge coup for us, we added Bobby Babich as our DB coach and passing game coordinator defense. He's been considered for head coaching openings. He was the defensive coordinator for the Bills, so he's going from defensive coordinator to DB coach and passing game coordinator defense. His specialty is in the secondary, and he runs very similar coverage schemes to what Gannon likes to do. And if you look at the Bills, they were very successful in their secondary despite having elite talent. So, despite lacking elite talent, I should say. So, Bobby Babich is a significant upgrade over Ansley in every way. And that's really exciting because Bobby Babich and Gannon are going to be peers, okay? Not in title and position, but in experience. So Bobby Babich could be very vocal in that defensive room and say, hey, Gannon, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? Whereas with Hafley, the assistants were very subordinate and lower in experience. So I think Babich and Gannon can work as a brain trust together and feed off of each other and really improve this defense overall versus what we saw in 2025. We also have Sam Skefkes. Probably mispronouncing that name. Sorry, Sam. When you come on and do a video with us, I will make sure I get your name correctly. That's an invitation to Sam to come on the Pack Attack Cast whenever he wants to. He's the new linebackers coach. He was the defensive coordinator for Virginia Tech in 2025. He was the linebackers coach for Gannon in 2023 and 2024. And if you look at the linebackers in 2024 for the Cardinals, I know a lot of people didn't. I had to go back and look at some tape myself. The linebackers in 2024 for the Cardinals really played above their skill level. So I'm very excited that we again have another former defensive coordinator taking on a position coach role to really bring more brain power into this room. In addition to that, Sam was just a defensive coordinator in college. That means he probably has some new ideas from the college ranks that we could bring into the defense, which is another good thing to have. So, overall, while I'm sad to see Jeff Hafley go, I think the additions to the defensive staff are a big positive over what we had in 2025. We have multiple coaches with defensive coordinator experience. We have peers that can communicate with each other and bounce ideas off of each other. And one of the things that has been a negative for the Packers is that they haven't put the money into the coaching staff in the past. Justice Mosqueda of Acme Packing Company has a great article on this about how the Packers have skimped on assistant coaches. And while I don't think that this article impacted this change, I will say that I think the Packers are putting all of their chips on the table and they're saying, look, we don't have the draft picks we would like. We have challenges with our salary cap. But one thing that the league does not manage is how much you spend on your coaching staff. And I think the Packers have made the decision, Ed Policy has made the decision to put all of his chips on the table and say, we're going to spend money on our coaching staff this year. And I think that's going to pay off big dividends. So we're going to be back in a couple days. We're going to try to do a Pack Attack cast every other day in the off season while we get ready for training camp. We have the draft coming up, obviously. We've got free agency coming up, and it'll be interesting how the Packers spend their money in free agency. I think the Packers are going to spend more money on extending contracts for their own players than they are in free agency this year. So I think players like Tucker Kraft and possibly some wide receivers that are coming up at the end of their contracts are going to get extensions this year, or they're going to try to save the money for next year. In my opinion, coaches and teams are better off getting those contracts done a year early than a year late. Because you don't want to re-sign a player when he's about to become a free agent. The cost is going to go up. So I would like to see Brian Gutekunst extend some players in the offseason once the league season starts. So we're going to watch that very closely. Also, training camp this year is going to become a big part of what we do. We did a lot of that last training camp. I was there for a week. I'm going to try to get there for a week and a half to 10 days this year. That's my goal. I'm actually going to transplant to Green Bay for as much of training camp as possible, maybe even get a couple preseason games in. That's a big part of our goal, so watch for that. And we're very excited about expanding our coverage on the Pack Attack cast in year number 2. And you could be a part of that by hitting that subscribe button. And we'll be back with another edition of the Pack Attack cast in a couple days. If there's any late breaking news, we will immediately come on and do a special video to discuss it. And we'll see you then. As always, go Pack Go. Very excited about 2026. I think if we can address the injury issues, we've already found ways to improve the coaching. And if Brian Gutekunst can find ways to work magic in the draft and in free agency, I think the Packers are still on a trajectory for a Super Bowl in 2026. We'll see you next time. As always, go Pack Go.